What you call me?
Man, I ain't Poe.
Hello and welcome back to Old Soul Podcast. My name is Bree, that's spelled B-R-E-I. Thank you so much. Today's film commentary is going to be a part of the Black Film series, and the title is Moonlight. This film is directed by one of my favorite directors, I won't say of all time, but to me, as of right now, in this more modern age, I do think that he is one of the best directors yet, and period, and his name is Barry Jenkins. The film has a runtime of an hour and 51 minutes. It is rated R, and it was released in the year of 2016. One of its biggest producers, I believe, is A24, and if you know anything about A24 movies, you know that usually whenever they have their stamp on something, the movie's going to be a journey, interesting, abstract, experimental, and overall good. So, just so you know. Okay, so because this film has a very specific way of telling it, I often, when people might come across me and ask me about what I feel about this film, I generally do have sort of an overall summary of how I feel Barry tends to encompass and build his films. And so I feel like specifically for Moonlight, but not too far from his other films as well, that I have not yet done commentaries on, but I will eventually. I feel that Barry creates films that are like poetry on screen. And what I mean by that is just I feel like poetry has so much depth to it that, you know, you have to read between the lines, or you have to pull back the layers of that onion just to figure out really what's going on and the complexities of that story. And I do feel like Moonlight is a story that would be very difficult to tackle in its approach to the Black community, an overview. So the Black community, poverty, addiction, single parent homes, the Black experience from different perspectives, specifically Black people, Black men, masculinity, the coming of age aspect with a lot of heavier trauma because of someone's sexuality and identity, which we'll get more into. And ultimately, the film is always so beautiful to watch. It's usually really crisp. Barry films are pretty crisp and clear. I do see a lot of color themes going on sometimes. So there's a specific scene that I will get into later where there's like this pinkish purple color. There's a lot of blues that show up in specific scenes. Then later we have more, I want to say, dim lighting and a restaurant diner scene. It's just interesting. It's interesting. I think there was like a shaky handheld moment in the film when we were watching one of the characters at a younger age. Just things like that I just feel like are everywhere in the film and not. So obviously when there's a certain shot of something or a certain scene that seems to execute something specifically while it's telling a theme or a topic and telling a story, but then other parts of the storytelling process for Barry seems to be throughout the film, which obviously a lot of directors do that, but not in the way that Barry does it, of course, and I think that's what makes him very original. And I hope that I never have to not like Barry as a director. Well, it's one thing for someone not to be your favorite director anymore because maybe their style has changed and you just don't like it as much as you liked their older films. It's another when, you know, in Hollywood, people start getting exposed for being terrible people, and unfortunately that seems to be a lot of Hollywood. But I hope I never have to take back the fact that I really love Barry as a director. I'm not someone who can separate art from the artist, because if you're supporting their art, you're helping the artist. That doesn't exist. That can't happen, you know. So I hope I never have to regret saying that. And okay, so basically I'm going to try to do as quick as I can with each of these characters in a similar way that the film tackles the characters. So we're focused on one main character. His name is Chiron. That's spelled Chiron. But the casting, which was incredible by the way, the mannerisms of each of the actors really encompassed the main character, and they all did a beautiful job. And casting 3 people for one role is not easy. I'm sure it was not easy. Okay, so the first character is basically the young version of Chiron, and his nickname is Little, so we're going to call him Little because that's what everyone else calls him, and you'll see throughout the film that Chiron rarely gets called Chiron, but Chiron is one person, and the film divvies him up from childhood, like child, little, to teenager, to becoming young adult, and then an actual, like, full-grown adult. And then what sort of conspired in the beginning of his life, the middle of his life, to now his adulthood, and how that affected him, and how he turned out. And the film even has like these sort of post-credit, or maybe not even post-credits, but they have like these end cards like the older films used to do, and they come up and they say like Little, and then we go into a scene. And actually it's usually a scene and then the postcard or the little end card, and then it'll say Little, and then when we transition it'll say Chiron, and then it'll transition and it'll say Black. And then again, Little is the youngest version, Chiron is the teen version, and Black is the oldest version of Chiron. And I guess you could say that those nicknames encompass who they are and what identity they take on. And maybe in a way, the teenage version of Chiron is his most vulnerable, fully himself that he's ever been, just for it to crash and burn by the end of that sequence. So, yeah. To no fault of his own, to some extent. Okay, we'll get there. Okay, so we're going to start with Little. Okay, so some things that really showed up to me for Little is who raised him. So right away in the film, we see that Little is getting bullied. We find out pretty quickly that he's getting bullied because people think that he's gay. And even his mom at some point comments on the way that he walks, things like that. Just things that people would consider, I suppose, mannerisms, actions, expressions, things that would clock someone for being gay or being different. And I think Little, he's internalizing it, one, because he doesn't really understand anything yet, but I think he does know at a pretty young age that he probably is gay. And I know that a lot of people that are gay tend to say that they knew pretty young. They either like ignored it or didn't face it, or they were just really young and didn't know that in the society that would be considered bad for whatever reason, right? So he's dealing with homophobia as a child. I mean, he looked like he was in elementary school, and I'm pretty sure he was. And so this brings up another topic that I will get into a little more because it comes up in his teenage years again. But I think bullying, people tend to talk about it, I think, a lot more seriously now than they did in the past. And I think because a lot of bullying in the day could be handled when kids just tussled and then it was done. But nowadays you have cyberbullying and you have gun violence and things like that. So we just can't have the same conversations. And I also think that mental illness was not taken in or understood. And you see pretty quickly that Little doesn't talk much. And it doesn't seem to be just because he's more of an introvert and he's quiet, although that could be an aspect of his personality. But I do think a lot of the time he's quiet because he's not heard, he's not understood, and he's not listened to, not even by his own mother, who tends to be pretty absent. That could be because she works a lot. But we soon see that a lot of the reason why is because she's a single mom and she has a drug addiction, and having a single parent is already difficult enough than having a drug addiction. And then she changes when she's on drugs. She tends to be very distant, very rude. She sells a lot of the things in the house for money. You know, he's not really being taken care of in the way that he probably would need to. That, you know, no hate to any of the single parents out there. Kids can totally be raised in single parent households. It takes a village, and I'm sure you might need a little more help, and there's no shame in that. This is a completely different aspect into which he's, poor, which a lot of people are poor, which makes things harder whether people want to acknowledge it or not. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve to have children. It doesn't mean that your kid can't turn out perfectly fine, but we can't ignore the challenges that come with poverty, and we can't ignore things like alcoholism and addiction that make those things that are already difficult more difficult, and it's going to take more than a village. So that clearly did affect Little in a very negative way. And quickly, like I said in the first scene, when Little's getting bullied, he runs into like this abandoned sort of crack house. And that's when he first meets Juan, who is a drug dealer in that community. And he goes in and kind of becomes the hero in a sense. And Little really grasps toward him as a safety net. And Juan starts to take on sort of a fatherly role. Little at first doesn't want to explain really what he's feeling or what he's going through. He doesn't want to tell anyone where his house is. So Juan feeds him, tries to get him to talk. He won't. He takes him home. And he takes him home to, I don't know if it was his wife or his girlfriend, and her name is Teresa. And they feed him again, and they try to get him to talk. And then they let him stay the night because he won't talk, but they're not going to let him go out there and get hurt. But again, it's sort of like stranger danger, like you don't know this guy, Little, and whatever. Luckily, Juan isn't a creep, and neither is Teresa, and it actually forms a good bond where he goes over there sort of like his uncle and aunt, but Juan seems to be more like an older brother, father figure to him. He also seems to grasp toward Teresa as sort of an older sister or a mother that he doesn't have. He has a mom, but she doesn't really act like a good mom. And he tends to start going over there a lot. They give him like pocket change. You can tell pretty quickly, there's a few times where Juan drops Little off and the mom's not happy to see him. She probably knows he's like a drug king or whatever there. Also, she's mad. She's like, no one's going to raise my son but me, blah, blah, blah. Where were you? I was worried, blah, blah, blah. For the few times that they meet, and she tells Juan to stay away, blah, blah, blah. Juan does actually not ever go toward Little. Little always goes to Juan's house or shows up at Juan's house or whatever. And eventually we find out later in the teenage years that, he started going over there a lot. The mom kind of didn't mind it anymore. And it was what it was. So he found family in someone else, to be honest. And I'll get into another scene later about Little and Juan and swimming. But for now, that's an overview for most of Little's life. And then, so the next version that we get is Chiron, which is just in this context of the sequence of the film, we see an older version of Little, now a teenager in high school, and we call him Chiron now, based on the end card in the film. Okay, so Chiron is still getting bullied. We see that right away. This time, there's like one specific person that's picking on him. They all grew up together, whatever, but they didn't ever seem to be close. They harass him in the hallways. They threaten him and say, we find you after school, we're going to jump you. Clearly, it's always a jump. They can never do anything alone. They don't like him because he's gay. At this point, I think Chiron has accepted that he is gay, even though he's figuring out his sexuality. So they feel like they have to be some sort of fucking, oh, I gotta get rid of this guy because he's gay. It's super homophobic. It's not uncommon for homophobia to be in the society that we are in now, especially not in the Black community, unfortunately, to my dismay. But it's the real thing, and I think Barry did tackle that concept pretty accurately, while still not putting too much trauma on it, and still allowing there to be intimate, softer moments, especially when we were in the version of Little as a child. And now we're getting more into teenager who's becoming an adult. So, he's having dreams about a guy that he wants to be with. And that's where we probably get the rated R rating here, because he's thinking about explicit forms of sex. And then he's, going into actually having sexual experiences with this other guy who actually tends to be one of his friends known as Kevin, who he knew since he was a kid. Kevin was the one who wasn't bullying him. Kevin had been the one to have his back. to tell him everything was going to be all right. And then he, in the beginning of this sequence as Chiron in Chiron's teenage body, they seem to be on pretty good terms. And although Chiron was seeming like he didn't really want to tell Kevin that he was getting bullied, but I'm pretty sure Kevin could tell already. But Kevin was liked by a lot of the other people, even the bullies that were bullying Chiron. So you can tell that Chiron is still sort of an outsider and an outcast, even at this age, unfortunately. And then, to no fault of his own, might I be clear about that? Okay, so, yeah, it sucks. I mean, the whole sequence of him being a teenager is pretty dreary, at least with when we had the little version of him. There were some good moments. But I guess I could just state that, you know, homophobia is crazy in his teen years. Like, it's wild. It's not surprising, like I said, in the Black community, although I think things might be a little better than it was. It's not better in every way. Just like, you know, when you think racism's finally maybe getting a little more bearable, which isn't to say that that's okay, but, you know, subtle forms of racism does not make it okay that it's racist, right? Then you just end up being in some place and you're like, oh, fuck, it's bad here. It's bad, right? So that's kind of how it feels. And then I guess I'm going to get to the main point of the story because we really just kind of go through the motions of Chiron trying to figure out who he is, getting harassed, being super, super overwhelmed and angry and sad. He talks about how he cries all the time. He'll think his tears will basically wash him away. He cries so much. And I will say the tackling of masculinity, being vulnerable and expressing your emotions and being able to cry and be honest with another guy about that, which he tells Kevin this basically at some point. And then exploring your sexuality and the accurate representation of how teenagers and young adults tend to do that, which was a choice by Jenkins. But then we have the bullying that gets worse because, you know, they start to physically beat him up and jump him. And there was a point where he didn't want to press charges because I think deep down he knew that it wasn't going to fix anything. If anything, they would just come back, and that's like one against however many guys. And so he got his revenge. And I just want to state that I don't like people who act like words aren't harmful. So let me say that again. I think that words are harmful, especially in our day and age where people can harass you on social media, not just in a specific in-person environment, but also on social media. Words have gotten people killed, whether they kill themselves or they've gotten lynched because someone wanted to say something that wasn't true, or, you know, so on and so forth. And so I truly think that people that believe words aren't powerful and violent are full of shit. It's like when someone throws around the N-word with a hard ER, that's a violent word to me. I don't care what anyone says. Now, in a court of law, if you assault someone, that means you go and you harm them with malice intent and it is not in self-defense, you will be at risk for having charges pressed against you, right? So that's a decision you have to make on your own. I'm not saying anyone should or shouldn't do that. I'm just saying I believe in self-defense. I don't believe in throwing the first punch, but I will, you know, counteract that if it has to happen. Self-defense is a thing, and you can't fight violence with no action. Unfortunately, most of the places that a lot of us live are built off of violence and the death of a lot of innocent people. And that's the sad truth. So I'm going on a tangent there, but I just want people to understand the scope of how powerful words are and how a lot of the victims will get literally beaten to a pulp, and then when they finally say enough is enough, it becomes an issue without actually taking in all the other things that have happened to them. Okay? But in this case, Chiron he literally got beat up the day before. He was done with it. He went back to face his main bully that caused all this. He walked into the classroom. He got a wooden chair and he smashed that shit across that bully's face. The bully wasn't even expecting it. He fell down and Chiron was beating the shit out of him. All I'll say again is, if you assault someone, you better be ready for the charges. But if it is in self-defense, and self-defense as in they hit you, you hit them back on the spot, not they hit you, you calculated it, and then you went and hit them back. In a court of law, the only way that's going to be considered self-defense is if they hit you, you hit them back in the moment, I believe. Now, don't quote me on that. I'm not like super versed in laws, but that's how the system works, and unfortunately the system's pretty flawed. But I will say that on one hand, in that scene, it's so violent, it's so terrible that you don't want Chiron to turn up like the people who harmed him, and so often people become their own monsters. But on the other hand, I'm like, that dude fucking deserved it. As long as he didn't die, then fuck him, you know? But then on the other hand, it's like, yikes. And then you think about how Chiron was beat up by 5 people, not even one person, and they ran away, and because Chiron didn't press charges. I really wish Chiron were to press charges, but we all know retaliation when you're gay or you're black or whatever, they like to be like, oh, well, it's your fault because blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you know, whenever you feel like you stood up for yourself, no one's ever there. No one ever has your back. But God forbid someone does something absolutely terrible to you or says something absolutely horrendous to you. So it was hard because I'm someone who doesn't go to violence right away. But as I get older, it's really hard for me to stay silent in a world that constantly, you know, rewards terrible people who exploit lots of people. And the people who happen to be on the end of violence and threats and hatred all the time are always POC, black people, gay people, trans people, people who are usually minding their own business. And of course there's bad people in all communities, but it's just the stereotype of, because they're this way, I'm going to make it my narrative and generalize that they're all bad people, and that's just not how any of this works. But unfortunately, it is how our world works, so here we go. There's no real logic sometimes. Anyway, that's all I'll say about Chiron. After he hits the guy, you know, he gets arrested and he gets sent in this cop car. And I'd have to note that one of the people who also helped jump Chiron with all the other bullies who had been attacking him for a long time was Kevin, because Kevin was trying to stay on the good end of the stick with all the bullies because he didn't want that turned on him. And this was also after Kevin and Chiron had been intimate and romantic with each other, and they'd been friends for a long time before that. So I think that was really the tipping point for Chiron, that, like, you know, before I had bullies, but I had one person on my team, now the person I trust betrayed me, and they beat me so viciously, and I had no way to fight back. I was one against however many, and then I got my revenge, and I think that was the catalyst to him wanting to get revenge in such a violent way that really I don't think was really in Chiron, but everyone has a breaking point, so I guess that's where it stemmed. And then he got arrested and he got charges, and that changed his life. And later you see that his family, well, him and his mom moved to Georgia. And at some point in these teen years, Chiron still went to Teresa's house and still had a bond with her before him and his mom moved. But I believe that Juan died a little bit at some point when Chiron was a teenager. We didn't see any specific scenes, but I'm assuming that he probably died with crime-related reasons. He was in a life where he couldn't even keep his back toward the door. You know, we had scenes of him walking to the door with a gun when someone was knocking on it if they weren't invited. He was in a dangerous field, and unfortunately, he probably died in that field. So I also want to note that there was a specific scene that when Chiron was smaller, or otherwise named Little, he got really upset with Juan at the dinner table, and, you know, he asked a few questions. So one of the questions he asked were, what's a faggot? Because people were calling him a faggot. And granted, I don't throw that word around at all, but I'm being explicit and not sugarcoating here because that's what he was called and that's what he was asking, and he didn't understand what that term meant. And then Juan sort of tells him, oh, that's a derogatory word that people use to make gay people feel bad. And he's like, you know, am I gay? And Juan's like, you could be, and there's nothing wrong with that, and so on and so forth. So Juan was also the first person to accept Little for who he was entirely, as well as Teresa, in a way that Little's mom never seemed to do and never seemed to possibly do in the future. So yeah, and then Little asked him, are you a drug dealer? And then Juan says yes. So we know that for a fact he was a drug dealer, but there were other signs in the film that you'll see pretty quickly. And then he said, and my mom gets drugs from you in one way or another. And Juan's like, yes. And then we see Little leave the table and go home. He was really upset about that. So that was a really sad scene. But also, it just shows, like, people are never really as black and white as we wish they were. We just have to decide on what our morals and values line up with and what they don't. And while I think Juan was a good figure to have in Little's life, there's a lot of negativity in Juan looking up to someone who inherently sells drugs to people in the neighborhood. And, Juan and Little's mom even had this conversation when Little was pretty small, I think. And he sees her buying drugs or with her boyfriend or whatever, pulls her out of the car, and she's like, you're not going to raise my son. What are you? You're going to raise my son? And he didn't say anything. And she's like, I don't want you raising my son. Basically, you're a drug dealer. And he's like, you shouldn't be doing this, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, aren't you the one selling me the drugs? And don't give me that shit that, like, if it wasn't me, it'd be someone else. It's you, motherfucker. It's you, going off. So, I mean, there's some morality there. And I guess I'll just leave that up to you. Right? But ultimately, I do think that Juan was a positive influence in Little's life to some extent. And it's just too gray. It's not black and white. He could be a bad person in this field and good to a specific person, and that person will only ever remember the best in him because he gave them the best of him. That's usually how life is. Okay, so now we're moving on to the final, and I mean the final version of Chiron, which is his adult version. And in summary, I think that the adult version just tackles his past trauma, coming back and manifesting in who he is as a person now, and then sort of talking to Kevin again. So we find out pretty quickly that Black, who is the adult version of Chiron, is a drug dealer. He has decided to move to Georgia with his mom years ago, and then after that whole thing where he hits the bully over the head and blah, 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 and they press charges or whatever. But now he's living in Atlanta, Georgia, or somewhere in Georgia, maybe not specifically Atlanta. And his mom's in like a facility, I believe, at this point, trying to get clean, or is clean right now. And they're trying to fix their relationship. At some point, she tells him that she's sorry, and they have sort of an emotional moment, but he's still pretty upset, as anyone would be. And then we see Black, selling drugs, taking another person under his wing to sell for him. His style's different, but his mannerisms are somewhat the same. He seems a little harder. He keeps guns in his car, things like that. And then he randomly gets like a call from Kevin, and Kevin's living somewhere, and he invites them or says, hey, I work at this diner or whatever. And then Black just decides one random day to go and visit Kevin. He goes, he visits him, and then they talk, they reconnect. Kevin says sorry. After Black sort of pulls that out of him, and still seems to have a little bit of animosity, understandably. But then Kevin asks what he's doing now. Kevin says he has a daughter or whatever, but he's not with anyone. And then Black's like, oh, I'm not with anyone either. Clearly still likes Kevin. And it's almost romantic, honestly, with the lighting, and because they always had really good chemistry together. But then Black is like, oh, but I sell drugs, if you want to be honest. Like, that's what I do. And Kevin's sort of shocked, like, that's not who you are. And then Black gets mad. He's like, you don't know who I am? We've just met after years of not talking. And then he gets defensive, basically. Then they go back to Kevin's house, and Black admits that he was the last person that he was with, and that he's not been with anyone since Kevin, so on and so forth. And then Kevin's sort of shocked by that. But then, they sort of reconnect and have that moment. And then that's the end of the film. We see a quick shot of Chiron when he was little in the moonlight by the ocean where the water is, that he tends to like the water, which is probably because that's where he spent a lot of time with Juan. And then that's the end of the film. One of my favorite scenes in the film were, there's this moment when Chiron is in his smallest version as little, and the mom is yelling at him, but instead of it just being like this really loud, explosive scene, which we do get later when he's a teenager, the mom is yelling at him, very angry, upon a backdrop of like these like purple and pink hue-ish colors, and then it does like a shot reversal in somewhat slow motion. It seems like everything's slowed down, and all you hear is an amazing soundtrack from Nicholas Britell, who's collabed with Barry tons of times. They're super, super, super good together. Barry as director, Nicholas as composer. Phenomenal. Shout out to Nicholas. And then we see Little upon the shot reversal, and we see Little like sad, looking at his mom in sort of an angry but sad way. He can't say anything. Then we cut back to the mom after she's done yelling. She walks away, closes the door, and the colors go away, and then Little eventually walks away. Then we have the classroom fight scene. I just think it looked really good. The way that he rushed in, grabbed the chair. There was no hesitation after he picked up the chair, smashed it across the boy that had been bullying him and causing him so much stress and harm. And the bully falls on the ground, and then you see this cut of Chiron with the broken pieces of the chair and then going down to hit him again. Really intense stuff. I don't remember if there was any noise. Probably not. I can't remember, but it was intense. I think it's a really good representation of rage to take away the sound, because it's all in the expression, you know? But it's interesting. And then we have the swimming scene with Little and Juan, and Juan's teaching him to swim and to get relaxed and to enjoy it. And he has this whole thing where he tells him that he's from Cuba. Juan tells Little he's from Cuba, and he talks about this lady who said that he looked blue. You know, black boys look blue in the moonlight. They glow, they're beautiful, you know, their skin is personified in the moonlight. It looks really pretty, because we get a later shot of Little in the moonlight, and he looks great. So cute. And then I already talked about the scene between Juan and his mom, but I think that scene where she was buying drugs and fighting each other, I think it's a pivotal point, and it needed to happen, and it needed to be in the film, because it was sort of that moral dilemma of addict and drug dealer and communities and things like that. I think it was important to talk about and touch on. And I also already talked about this, but it's still noted in my notes, that the scene between Kevin and Chiron, because there was something about the dim lighting in the diner and them sitting in the booths that just looked so cool on screen, and it was different than the rest of the film. I think a lot of the film had darker hues or blues or pinks, outside settings, and this one really seemed to be a lot more enclosed outside of when Little was in his apartment or with his mom or whatever. This one was black or otherwise older Chiron, with Kevin in the diner, then in his small house, and in his house, and there was a few scenes in the car that Juan had passed down to him, so that seemed more like enclosed spaces in a box. Okay, so I think the only last thing that I want to say before my quote segment is that Nicholas Britell is amazing as a composer. Go look up some of his other work. Barry Jenkins is one of my favorite directors of all time. Watch this film and his other films. A24 is one of the best producers in the game right now. Go argue with your mama. And Moonlight deserved to beat La La Land. Also go argue with your mama. Okay, now time for the quotes. This is a quote in which Juan is talking to Little, which is the smallest version of Chiron. Let me tell you something, man. There are black people everywhere. You remember that, okay? No place you can go in the world ain't got no black people. We was the first on this planet. Okay, and this is Juan talking to Little again. Juan, I saw your mama last night. Little, I hate her. Juan, I bet you do. Juan, hated mine too. Juan, miss her like hell now. All I'm gonna say about that. Okay, this is between Kevin and Chiron as a teenager. Kevin, what you cry about? Chiron, I should have cried too much sometimes. I feel like I'm just gonna turn into drops. Kevin, just roll out into the water, right? Roll out into the water just like all these other motherfuckers around here trying to drown their sorrow. And then the last quote is from Black, the oldest version of Chiron. It is what it is. Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.
I'm sorry, babe. I'm so sorry.